here's just a podcast. I'm very curious to know how people get to where they get to, right? Because I have 10 siblings. We're all very different. Even though we're raised by the same mother, we came out completely different and in completely different places of life. Not only that.
So I've talked to my brothers about this. I have my 3 younger brothers, and we're only 3 years apart, but I feel like each of us, like each different age group, because the youngest 2 are twins, are very different from one another. Like my middle brother is very free-spirited, very just like doesn't worry about much of anything, flies by the seat of his pants. I am very regimented, and my younger brothers, my youngest, are very, very intelligent. They both live near Pittsburgh, and then the other 2 of us are out here. So like, just completely different personalities, completely different interests, but grew up in the same house.
And to me, I find that interesting. But then not even that. I guess you know how like things happen in people's life? Like something can happen to you and the exact same thing can happen to me, right? But then we both make a decision in those moments to turn out completely different.
I had a conversation similar to this yesterday with my middle brother, because I don't remember how we got on the topic, but he pointed out that he was in 2 car accidents within like 8 months of each other. One was with me driving and one was with my entire family when we were driving on vacation. And it was those 2 instances in that short period that he then didn't want to learn how to drive until he was like 24.
Yeah.
But like, I never put that together that they happened in such quick succession, and that was the reason he didn't want to drive.
Yeah. But yeah, so I'm kind of intrigued to know what happened in your life.
Right.
Kind of got you to be right here. And so one of the most important part for me is, what was it in the military, right? You were in the Army?
I was in the Army. Yeah.
Army. One, why would you want to even join the Army, right? Because I find it very hard to believe that someone loves their country so much that they're like, yeah, I'm willing to die for it, right? And again, maybe
the irony is that I didn't feel that way until I was in the Army.
Okay. See, before I don't want to, because you're gonna spoil it, and we're gonna end up. But because we haven't technically started yet, I haven't given my intro. You know, what's that intro, man? Come on, my guy.
No, you have to have that pre-recorded. It has to be like
and
as lights and dancing. Like I'm expecting you like shuffling across, like you're sidestepping when we go get burritos in the morning.
No, not at all.
Oh, come on.
But yeah, so the Army, and what your experience like was in it. You've told me a little bit of stories. You don't have to share everything, of course, because whatever you're comfortable enough to share, right? Because I know that's a big part of your life and kind of how you are the way you are today.
Oh yeah.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Again, if you're not comfortable.
I have no problem talking about that stuff.
Okay.
I think it's more important to talk about that stuff than to like bottle up and sit on it.
Right.
And I think you can say the same thing about your background. Is like it's better to talk about those things, because if you fester on them, then it's going to have a negative impact on you long term. Right. Whereas if you talk about it, like I met a veteran 5 years ago, and he and I were in Afghanistan at the same time. He was in the east and I was in the north, doing very similar jobs, but he took the brunt of a few attacks and suffered a TBI and some other stuff. But you know, comparing stories, like we had a lot of the same experiences. His just went sideways, and that opportunity to share those stories messed me up for like a week. Like I digressed into a lot of the symptoms that I had when I first got home, but I've learned a lot of coping techniques, coping methods to get through that, and you know, to talk about it is one of them. So whether it's in like a private forum like this, or it's, you know, talking to another soldier or service member about their experiences and just kind of comparing notes more or less. Right. I think it's important to get it out there and for people to understand that it exists and it affects people differently. Yeah. Because like on the surface, like I don't have like any physical wounds. I don't think I'm as bad off as some that do suffer from PTS still today, years after their deployment, years after their incident. But it does sneak in every once in a while, and it's often hard to identify, but it's easy. Well, I don't want to say it's easy. There's ways to work through it, right, if you know how.
See, and so and I would love for you to, because at the end of the day, this is more so for whoever ends up watching it, right? Yep. Maybe there might be someone out there that's been through it and they just don't have that information.
You just don't know.
That's what we're going to talk about. Okay, so that, if you'd like to share some of those tips and where people can go and find that help that they need, I would love for you to throw that in there as well too. And then, how did that affect your marriage? I guess because I think
I wasn't married at the time.
oh, okay,
This is before even Ashley was in the picture.
okay. So then, how? But okay, at some
But so here's the catch to that though, is that Ashley and I met over commiserating about personal struggles like that. We both have PTSD.
oh, did she go? Was she in the?
No.
Oh no. Oh, she just from life.
She was the victim of domestic violence in 2013, and it was one of the most violent domestic violence incidents in that municipality that did not end in death. It was really, really crappy. So from that, she's had a lot of PTS symptoms, a lot of similar struggles that I had coming back from Afghanistan. And we were out to dinner at a work function. This is the first time we met. And we were like almost like elbowing each other, but like playfully, like we want that seat to be able to like watch the room and like see what's going on around us.
Right.
And like that's a defensive mechanism, is like being able to see the entry points, being able to see who's like coming and going, and like watch people. Like it's as entertaining as it is, it's also a defense mechanism.
Right.
So we both caught on that one another were doing this, and then it just kind of became a game. And then from there, it just
You guys fell in love.
it just turned into a relationship.
Look
Yeah.
at you guys. Okay. I guess then I would ask, even though you met her after Afghanistan or after your army days, I'm pretty sure these symptoms still come up in the marriage. And how does that affect it? Like you two, and how do you guys go about one communicating it? And you know, like these are. I'm just asking you these questions so you can have them in the back of your head, because I'm gonna ask them again, and then you're gonna talk about it.
It's something that we actually struggle with.
Okay.
Is like we're able to self-identify each other having an episode more or less,
Right.
but it's hard for us to individually identify an episode. So like, I usually get more aggressive or like very aggressive when I'm having an episode, because I haven't slept, because there's something going through my head, because I haven't verbalized it. Again, that's why I think it's important to talk about these things, even if they come back. And I'll probably have a conversation with Ashley tonight. It's like, hey, I talked about this stuff, and she'll be like, okay, so what do we need to be aware of? And then just over the next 3-5 days, I might have some weirdness, but whatever. Then there's other times where we're like physically doing something, or something sets us off, and then we go like lock ourselves in a room somewhere, and like that is a little bit more obvious, because, or at least to the other person, because it like something has set you off, and you're putting up a defensive barrier and isolating yourself so that either you don't react poorly, or so it doesn't get worse, because the stimulant is still there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird to balance.
Well, I have so much like follow-up questions. Dude, this podcast might be like 4 hours long. We're gonna try not to do it like that.
I got a thing. I thought my
look at
people
you.
talk to your people. I thought we were like
No, we're
there's
trying
not enough Red Bull, and I'm
I know.
definitely gonna house up either burrito if we're gonna be here for 4 hours.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another episode of A Meal and a Conversation with Fallen Faith. Clearly, we've already got started. Matt's down one burrito already, and he's gonna try to get another burrito in. Good for him. Like I said, I have Matt with me today. Matt is my ex-boss.
Ex-boss, former
Yeah.
boss.
Oh, same thing. Tomato, really. That's really what that is. Actually, like, you're my previous boss.
Okay, we'll go with it. It's your show. You do
Yeah.
you.
You're right. I'm questioning him. I didn't question you doing your job.
Yes, you did.
I did. But
Regularly.
I
Why you literally just questioned me on doing my job?
hey, but we have to hit, though. I was your favorite employee. For sure. Hands down.
With the camera on, I'm not answering that question.
Oh, really? Well, look, just with that answer, everybody knows. And so I'm perfectly satisfied with that answer. Anyways, we're about to talk about his life and how he's gone to where he's gone to. You were born in Pittsburgh.
Yep.
Okay, I guess, was your family wealthy?
No.
Were they middle class?
Definitely middle class.
Were they lower middle class or higher middle class?
it fluctuated. At least in hindsight, I feel like it fluctuated. We lived in a nice part of town. We lived in a nice house. However, we didn't always have like the latest and greatest. We didn't always have like the new toy or like nice cars or great clothes. I remember we were often getting like hand-me-downs from like older kids. We'd just get a bag of clothes and we'd go through it, and if it fit, then that was it for the next couple of months. There were oftentimes arguments over where money would come from for food and like necessities around the house. It was a really weird dichotomy within my house. Yeah,
that's a big word. I don't know if my followers know. Can you please? You know how much I love big words, especially the ones
I feel like I should have gifted you like a word of the day calendar, because I haven't seen you in a month or two now.
What is that? Dichotomy?
Dichotomy?
Yeah,
like the balance.
Okay, I was able to put 2 and 2 together, but
context
it's for them, not for me.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
you're gonna blame it on the audience.
All right, continue. My bad.
No, it was just a really weird balance, because like we lived in a nice area, we lived in a nice house.
Okay, what was your how was your other than the weird dichotomy? I got you. Don't worry.
I'm proud
of the house.
I'll teach you.
How was your relationship with your siblings? How did that look like growing up?
That was a weird one too. I was the oldest of 4 boys, so I have 3 younger brothers, and the youngest are twins. The youngest and I were 6 years apart, so we were never in school together. Like, they wouldn't be in middle school the same time I was. They weren't in high school the same time I was. So we had different tracks that we were on. The middle brother and I.
You're the youngest or oldest? Okay.
So the middle brother, he was 3 years behind me. So I think he was in middle school the same time I was, but he was not in high school at the same time. So it was weird crossing over. We did summer sports together. Like, we all swam on the summer swim team. We swam on the varsity and JV kind of at the same time. But it was a weird one.
Okay. So how did Matt end up in the Army?
I graduated high school. I started at trade school learning drafting and design within less than a month of graduating high school. It was a 2-year program and went straight through the summer. It was constant. So like, my friends were home from college and I was going to school every day. My friends were away at college and I was going to school every day. So like, I was just kind of fast tracking through education. Graduated from trade school, worked in the industry for a little bit, and all my friends were gone at school, and just didn't like where I was at the time. When I was looking for post-secondary education, I was also talking to a recruiter, and it was just kind of in the back of my mind, because like, there were school benefits, there were other things that went along with being in the service. So 2005, I had a recruiter contact me and was like, hey, are you interested in the service? And like I said, I wasn't real happy with my job at the time. I wasn't real content with what I was doing in general. So I was like, yeah, I'll come down and talk and figure it out. So I went down, I took the ASVABs and placed fairly well. So I was able to pick almost any job in the Army, and I decided to be combat engineer. So
so what in the world is a combat? Because in my mind, I'm thinking about fighting, but I don't think you know how to fight. Is it?
So combat engineer is a person that goes out and either emplaces or removes explosives, for whether it's to impede movement or to provide access for movement. You could demolition bridges, you could breach doors, you could do a whole litany of things, but a combat engineer is someone who works with explosives.
All right.
So I went and talked to the recruiter. Less than 2 weeks later, I was down at the processing center, was getting my physical and everything done, and then I left for basic training within a month of signing paperwork.
Okay, so you went from not really being sure or whatever to going. Okay.
Yep. Full tilt. Yeah.
Okay, so my question. So that's interesting, because I feel like that's a different route than most people. Because whenever I hear about someone going to the army or the military, they just.
I was in my basic training. So when you go into the service, go into the army, you have basic training, which is BCT, basic combat training, and then there's AIT, advanced individual training. And basic training is the same for everybody. Everybody does that. That's just getting processed into the army. And then AIT is specific to your MOS, your military occupational specialty. So mine was, I think it was 5 weeks at the time for combat engineer. My total time away, I think, was 14 or 15 weeks. And so that was basic training and AIT. Some people go split up, meaning they'll do basic training like the summer between their junior and senior year, do their senior year, and then do AIT the following summer. Right. Some are even go to different bases depending on where there's slots available for basic training, and then AIT is usually at a specific training base. But I did OSET, or what is it? Single unit, no, can't remember what the acronym is, but I did it all at once in 2005 at Fort Leonard Wood. Graduated from that. It was kind of a funny story afterward. I came back to Pennsylvania and was supposed to process into my unit, and I called my unit every day for like 3 weeks, and they weren't answering their phones. I think I even went down to the base, and they just weren't available. I got a phone call almost 3 months after I got back from basic saying that I needed to report for mobilization. And basically what they were trying to do was, if I didn't report for that, I was considered AWOL, and they were trying to process me out, even though it wasn't on me, it was on a sergeant who just wasn't doing his job of returning phone calls. So I showed up to this physical to go to El Salvador, and the sergeant who was supposed to do my in-processing at the other base, the other unit, was there, and was like, "Oh, you're such and such. Where have you been?" I was like, "I've been calling you for 3 months." Yeah, it was funny.
What?
It was really funny. Yeah, so I finished that physical, then spent a month in El Salvador humanitarian mission, and that was a ton of fun. That's where I got to know my platoon leader at the time really well. Got to know my squad leader really well, and it was my platoon leader, Lieutenant Robles, later Captain Robles, that motivated me to become an officer, because I was just enlisted at the time. I might have been a specialist by then, because I went in with an education and very quickly went from a private first class to a specialist. But in El Salvador, I also met a full bird colonel who was going around and talking to people about going green to gold, which is going from enlisted to officer because you have education. So got back from El Salvador, my platoon leader and this colonel both kind of pushed me to put in my O1 packet, my officer packet. So I put together my officer packet and my E5 sergeant packet, and the officer recruiter called me first. So I went and did the whole officer boards and sat down with, I think it was 2 majors and a light colonel, and had an interview with them for an hour, and just went through the process there. But yeah, it was just kind of like one road marker after another. It wasn't really planned at first.
Right. No, so what I was trying to get at was, because whenever you think about someone either enlisting in the military or the Army or the Air Force, you tend to get the stories of those troubled people, right? The troubled kid who, this is literally like their last shot, right? Either their parents are like, "Hey, you're just a troublemaker," things of that nature. One, my question is, how true is that, like, with the people that you met? Like,
oh, there were some real shitbags. There were some real shitbags in basic training. There's one kid that faked an injury for half of basic, and he was on crutches. But because he was on crutches, he didn't have to come out for PT. I don't remember what he had to do, but there were several instances where he would like rummage through people's stuff. It was supposed to be like locked up, but he either figured out their combinations or figured out like where they kept the spare key or somehow, but he would break into people's lockers and take personal items like cash or
what?
Yeah, this guy was a jackass. Had another kid that he was kind of he wasn't great, But he made it through basic. He made it through most of AIT. I think it was the last week of AIT. He decided to sneak out of the barracks at night, sneak off post, and did something. I can't remember. I want to say he like stole something from a convenience store or whatever, and he ended up he was processed out of the Army in the long run, but he did not graduate. He was just stuck with the unit for another few weeks to a month after everybody else graduated and left, because he just got wild hair and wanted to go do something reckless. Yeah.
That is so weird.
It's really stupid. But yeah, there were a few idiots in my basic training class.
But you just happen to be one of those special cases where just have this stuff together, you just kind of didn't know. You were just tired of what you were doing.
I just didn't want to be doing what I was doing,
and the Army was...
And the Army just seemed like a good idea. Just completely mix it up.
Hey, so you made an interesting comment earlier when I asked you, because I said, I find it very hard to believe that people actually go to the Army because they love their country, right? Like, to me, that makes no sense. Like, I'm grateful for what America has provided for me and my family, but would I ever personally say, oh yeah, I think I'm ready to die for America? I'm not going to lie to you. No, I personally wouldn't, but you said that originally, no, that was not your thought. But it wasn't until after you were actually in the Army that you actually...
It wasn't until I was actually in the Army that I had opportunities and experiences, whatever, that kind of changed my perspective.
Okay, so what is that? I'm curious to know what that perspective is. I'm pretty sure you're probably...
Like, I've always been proud to be an American, right?
Right. I'm proud to be... I don't want you to get me wrong. I
know what you're saying. Is like, there's like proud to be an American and like displaying the American flag and like taking pride in the liberties that we have. But then there's like going to the next level and like defending for those liberties, defending for whatever. Like, I'm not discrediting anybody's patriotism. There's certainly different echelons to it.
Another good word.
Levels, like a
I know that one, but I like how you threw that in.
Edit. There's definitely different echelons to it, and I don't think I realized how important it was to me until I was in the Army, because like they desensitize you to a lot of things in basic training, like getting shot at or like low crawling through live fire, like doing a lot of crazy stuff, because they're conditioning us to go and fight a fight, right? But it wasn't until like I was in I can't say that it was like the first platoon, the first company that I was in, but like over time, like building relationships with a lot of the other soldiers in my company, and then becoming a platoon leader. When I first commissioned, I was in a heavy equipment company, which we operated bulldozers and backhoes and all sorts of like big heavy equipment for building access roads or construction pads or a whole variety of things. We had sites all over the Northeast that we were working on. So that built a lot of camaraderie in me. And then when I got back from officers or BOLEC, basic officer leadership course, my commander at the time had been picked up at another company within our battalion to deploy to Afghanistan. He was like, Lieutenant Shire, I want you to come with me. I was like, okay, sure. When do we go? He was like, well, like beginning of the year, like 6 months later. I was like, okay, what do we got to do? He was like, well, we have these 3 training courses, whatever, that we have to complete. So I had just spent 5 or 6 months at Fort Leonard Wood again, and here's the irony. So you asked earlier about like the real idiots in basic training. So there was this my battle buddy, because you're always supposed to operate in like 2-man teams. Like if you go to the restroom, you take a battle buddy, just like security purposes, right? And what they're trying to do is teach you accountability. Is like just have someone know where you are so that something bad doesn't happen. My battle buddy in basic training went to a unit in Maryland, I think. And I didn't see him for like 2 or 3 years. We would message on Facebook or like through different platforms, whatever. But I was at a training event in West Virginia, and his unit was there at the same time. I had just commissioned, and he was walking out of the chow halls. I was walking in with I think he was either my first sergeant or my platoon sergeant. And he rendered a salute and was like, wait a second. And I was like, wait a second. And it was my battle buddy 3 years later. He was a buck sergeant at the time, and I had just made lieutenant. Right. But he was like, Shire, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I chose this route. But it was just funny to see, you know, how those relationships like diverge and then come back together again,
Right.
and how you run into somebody years later. On top of that, when I was in basic training, one of my drill sergeants, like he was like the hard ass. Like, you do not mess with this guy. When he's in the room, you are tip top shape.
Right.
I went back to Fort Leonard Wood 5 years later. No, what was it? 4 years later. 4 years later for Bullock. Same area, same base, same whatever. And that drill sergeant was then one of my Bullock instructors. And Bullock is gentleman's course. So like, you have class from 8 in the morning till 5 at night, and then you stay at a hotel and you can go off base and you can do whatever you want. Whereas basic training, you're locked up for 6 months, whatever. So he himself had that same response as like, Shire, what are you doing here? And, you know, I wasn't the most fit person in basic training. I was like middle high end of the pack in basic. But then to see me come back for Bullock, he was like, this doesn't make any sense. It was just comical.
You know what's okay? I have a good question for you. Because when I first met you, I thought you were just like strict and straightforward. I made you soft, honestly. I think that.
No.
I think so. Because you warmed up to me pretty quickly. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Because you and I have very similar personalities.
See, oh, you mean that?
I do mean that.
Okay.
I think you, Sarahine, and I all have similar personal experiences.
Right.
And similar outlooks on life in general. We carry it all differently. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, I'm like the cool guy in the group, really. If let's be honest.
And modest. So modest. It's just it oozes.
Oh, okay, that continue.
No, I think you, Sarah, he and I got along so well because we all have very similar perspectives on life and have had very similar experiences. And like, you're more approachable because like from my perspective, you don't wear it on your sleeve, but you don't hide it either. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Whereas like, because of my experiences, I'm a little bit more I'm more like withdrawn or like defensive in that regard. But like, once I get to know you, once I establish my comfort level, then I think we have very similar reactions to people and to situations, whatever. And Sarahine's the same way. It's like, people were constantly saying, well, she's just cold. Well, she's not cold. You're just an idiot. And it's not until you get to know her and know how to like crack a joke that she warmed up too. So I think we all have a very similar personality. We react at different intervals.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
No, because I think the day that I really like, again, 'cause I didn't know you.
It was the day you left. Don't lie. The day you like finally understood me is the day you left. It was like, all right, this guy's kind of cool. Fuck this place, but I'm out.
The day,
you can edit that.
No, the day that I gained like respect for you was we were having a conversation. You told me a little bit about your Army experience and things of that nature, and then, but just because the way you carried yourself at all times, right? Like, even though you were more of a serious person, well, at first, what I thought, and then I got to know you, and you got comfortable, and we're able to actually have a genuine conversation and joke and things of that nature. Like, I was like, and I appreciate this about people, because it's not like your life was easy. You didn't have anything handed to you or things of that nature. You went through experiences, but that you didn't allow that to affect how you treated other people, right? And I saw you as the boss. You treated us all the same. Me a little bit better because I'm your favorite, but that's besides the point. We won't talk about that.
I treat you differently because you're more delicate. I mean,
no.
I mean,
don't do that. Don't do that. I wasn't delicate enough.
I'm not delicate. I'm not a flower. Don't you come down on me.
No, but I respect the fact. I appreciate anyone that can go through an experience and not like project that on people. And I think we kind of formed that kind of respect for each other, right? Like, as soon as we met, like, you took me, was it me and Salahine out to lunch?
I took the two of you out to lunch.
Yeah.
We had crossed paths, but we hadn't really like interacted. So I was just trying to get a feel for the two of you, for your perspective on the office and everything. So it was kind of fact finding, relationship building, whatever. But yeah.
Yeah, but, and then I don't know. Yeah, we just all right. So how do you, okay, Afghanistan, I'm curious to know your experience there. How did you get, like, what does that look like? One day you just wake up and you're like, hey, we're going to Afghanistan. And what was your job there? What were you guys supposed to be? What was the goal there?
So like I said, I originally enlisted in the Army in 2005. I submitted my paperwork to become a lieutenant in 2009, commissioned in 2010, went to BOLIC in 2011. BOLIC was from February to July-ish.
Mm-hmm.
Got back from that. My commander at the heavy equipment company was like, I'm being transferred. I want you to come with me. I want you to be a platoon leader over there. So he and I and the rest of the command team, because it was 4 platoons, one company, 4 platoons, plus maintenance, so 5 platoons, platoon leader, platoon sergeant, or motor sergeant. So I think there was like 11 of us that went to 3 different schoolhouses over the next 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
So from August to November, I was back and forth to Fort Leonard Wood doing pre-mob training within the command structure of my company.
Is that where? I'm so sorry. Just because I know someone who was in the Army as well too. And Fort what? What is it?
Fort Leonard Wood.
Do you guys all always? Is
No.
that no?
No, so like I mentioned before, there's bases all across the United States, all across the world, and within the United States, there's like the home of the engineers, the home of the infantry.
Okay.
So engineering, military police, and the chemical brigade are out of Fort Leonard Wood. That's where they do all of their advanced individual training. That's where a lot of their like specific schoolhouses are. So when I went into the Army, enlisted, that's why I went to Fort Wood, because that's where engineering is. And then when I commissioned into the engineering regiment, or into the engineering officer regiment, I went back there because that's where home of the engineers are. And then when I did all the engineering training to go out to Afghanistan, it was all at the home of the engineers, Fort
Okay.
Wood.
Okay, cool. Now we
But there's, I don't even know them all, but all over the United States, like each base is the home of something. But yeah. So I spent a lot of time at Fort Wood in 2011, and then I took a month and a half just doing personal stuff, and we mobilized January 3rd, 2012.
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, 2012. We went to Texas for a month and a half doing mobilization training, getting all of our physicals, running drills and doing all sorts of stuff. Went to Texas though with 40 people in my platoon, and we had to trim it down to I think 30 plus the command team, so 32 total I think was my total structure going into theater. So we were at Texas for 40 days. We flew from there to Boston to Germany to Turkmenistan, stayed overnight in Turkmenistan, and then flew on a C-130 into northern Afghanistan somewhere around the middle to end of March.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to go back and look at my notes. When we got into country, it was cold. There was snow on the ground. It was cold. We did training with the unit that we were replacing, but it was funny because they all came together into like where their company headquarters was. So they had I think they had 3 platoons, and we were replacing them with 4. So they all came together at their company headquarters, and we ran missions with them from that base. But then once they left, our area of operations was actually 200 miles west. So we were out in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
So my platoon and I packed up all of our equipment, got all of the trucks that we just inherited like 2 weeks before, and drove them 200 miles to our base. And that was fun because we had, I can't remember who it was, but we had another platoon attached to us. So we had my platoon up front, and then like intermixed, and then my platoon at the back, providing security, because I think they were a haul platoon, a distro platoon, distribution. So they had like tractor trailers and some gun trucks, whatever. So we had to like intermix them and provide security. I think we rolled out with more than 30 trucks. Mm-hmm. Not huge, but at a platoon level, that's a decent compliment.
Okay.
So we drove to whatever base they were going to. I can't remember, but it was a good distance. Dropped them off, and then we finished the trek out to our base. And I think I had 16 or 18 trucks. I don't remember. Again, I have to go back and look. But yeah, it was it was just to get to where we were going was a decent move.
Okay.
And then we ran missions out of there for 6 months. No, it was more than that. It was 7 months.
What was this mission? What was it? And I don't know if you're allowed to talk about it or not. But
No, I mean, yes.
I don't want someone to come after me.
No,
I know this information.
So my role in Afghanistan was my platoon and I did route clearance. So we would go out and patrol roads, look for IEDs, look for roadside bombs, and disarm them, and just make sure that the routes are clear for other NATO forces and even Afghan forces to be able to maneuver in that area. So we were running missions 5, sometimes 7 days a week. Mm-hmm. I remember several times we would go 10 days straight, just mission. And we would either sleep out in the desert, like wagon wheel the trucks and sleep in the middle, or, you know, we would be running with NATO forces, the Finns, the Swedes, whomever, and we would just all just set up this massive perimeter and camp out in the middle of nowhere. But we ran a lot, and we would often drive to a specific route and then would drive that route over and over and over again at 3 miles an hour, just looking for bombs, looking for trying to identify IEDs or UXOs or all sorts of fun stuff. My platoon and I averaged an event, whether it was a firefight or an IED or something, every 2 weeks. Doesn't sound like a lot, but you know, to like that, it's an interesting statistic to me, because you hear about people getting complacent and like you're like, oh, there's an event, and then like you're ramped up, mm-hmm. and then you start to dwindle off, and then it happens again. So like, mm-hmm. there was very much like a rise and fall, mm-hmm. on a very steady schedule, and I think that was to our benefit, because we did get into a number of firefights, we did find a number of IEDs, but we never got complacent, and I think that was part of the reason that the tail end of our deployment got shitty, because we had a really good success rate, mm-hmm. in like, we didn't have any major injuries, we were effective, we were requested by certain NATO units to go out and clear routes. As I said though, we were supposed to be in country for 9 months. Past 9 months, you're supposed to get leave, mm-hmm. and then cycle out and cycle back. We were only supposed to be on a 9-month deployment, but at like month 8, I think they decided to extend us, because they saw a need to continue operations in the north, whereas we were originally supposed to be one of the last. And they decided to close down the base that we were on, pull my entire platoon back towards North Central, send a sister platoon within our company home on leave all at once, which is also atypical, and we took over their area of operations. So we took our equipment and my platoon and put it in a whole new area of operations and had to run that for a month while the other platoon was home on leave. Then we picked up and moved again to the next platoon's area of operations. They went home on leave, got back, and then we went to the third platoon's area of operations. We were in there for a month, and then I think they disbanded that platoon completely, like no more equipment, no nothing. That platoon was then integrated into the others, where there may have been shortages, or like pulled into headquarters because we were starting to demob. And we then ran a completely new area of operations for the last 2 months of our deployment. We moved, I still joke with some of my soldiers I keep in contact with that we were nomads. We had a fixed home for 6 months, uh-huh. and then we just moved all over RC North for the last 4 or 5 months. Yeah.
Okay. Back to your...
So during mobilization training, they trained us, especially the senior leadership, on how to interact with local nationals, whether it was the Afghan police, Afghan army, Afghan border patrol, mm-hmm. or even like village elders. So in country, that was my target. That was my objective personally, was just to talk to people. Mm-hmm. So we'd go out on a route, and there was this one time that we were patrolling this stretch of highway for hours and hours and hours, and we had intel that there was an IED on that route somewhere in that area, and there was this Afghan police or Afghan border patrol checkpoint along the highway, and it just looked like a mud fort, like something that you and I would build out in the woods. It was kind of rickety, just whatever.
Right.
So we went in there and we talked to them, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's over there." Like they knew where it was. They actually put two guys in a truck, like in like a Toyota, and drove to where it was, and like it is right there, and pointed to it, like. And we were able to then clear that IED, but it wasn't on the highway. So like the intel got us to where we needed to be,
right.
But you have to talk to people to figure out like the full story, right? Because like they don't have the same map reading experience. They don't have the same sort of technology that we did at the time. So you have to like literally boots on the ground, interact with people, get the intel, and respond accordingly, right? But I think that's another reason why my platoon and I were so successful, is because we were constantly talking to people. There was this one village that we went to pretty frequently, I would say almost every 2 weeks. And every time we went there, we knew something was going to happen. But every time we went there, we would stop and talk to the police chief or the village elder. That at one point, we went there with the Norwegians, and the Norwegians had contacted them before we went, and they put together this massive dinner for us. Like they slaughtered a goat, they had fresh yogurt, they had fresh fruit, all sorts of stuff for my entire platoon and I. And we just sat and had a meal with them. Like that's almost all it was. And then we got a little bit of information afterward. But it was nice because we had built a relationship with them, and then they wanted to feed us, which is huge. But I honestly I credit the success of my platoon to one, our weird event schedule. Like I said, we never had an opportunity to get complacent because it would come in a pretty steady wave.
Right.
But we were also constantly out talking to people. Like there was my truck, the three soldiers I had in my truck would make fun of me. It was like, oh great, LT's gonna go talk to somebody again. We'll see you in an hour and a half. But then I think they deep down understood. It was like, well, that's how we're finding this stuff. That's why, that's what's making this fun. So I know they were poking fun at me, but I think we were successful because of it.
What would you say was it? How did Matt grow in that time? Okay, so I guess I would first ask is, what was your thought perspective in life in general before you had the Afghanistan experience, and then afterwards, what's your, again, we'll talk a little bit more about the post-traumatic stress, but beyond that, how do you feel like you grew in those moments? Like how does that look like? Do you grow more? Do you kind of just, okay, can you kind of...
How old are you right now?
I'm grown.
How old are you?
26.
20, that's how old I was in Afghanistan.
Oh, dang.
I was 2012. I was 28. No. Yeah, 28.
Okay.
I was 28 when math.
Yeah, come on, man. 27
when I went in. I turned 28 there. I came home early 2013. So yeah, I was 27, 28 when I was in country. It's a learning experience. It's a growth experience, because like how many 20-somethings do you know it was like responsible for millions of dollars of equipment and the lives, like literally the lives of 30 or so people. Like we were trained and conditioned to be able to do that, but like that there's like the experience and the knowledge to be able to do it, but then there's also like the growth aspect, like the personal development that to be able to do that, and that's it was a learning experience.
Okay, so a lot of people talk about the way that the army or the military is treated, right? How the government treats them, right? Because in my thought process, I'm like, if you're giving someone this much responsibility, I feel like the treatment towards them should be a lot more, whether it's the pay. Because a lot of people say that y'all don't really get paid very much at all, if that's the case.
I thought the pay was pretty decent, but
well, like,
I don't know who you're talking to, but
well, I guess maybe also, I don't want to say it sounds wrong, maybe because you were educated and you actually you were higher rank or whatever, but I'm not sure. A lot of people say, look, let's say after you leave the army or the military, the treatment for, because you and I have had those conversations a little bit.
So I don't think I'm a good person to talk to about that.
Okay.
Because I got out of the army on really crappy terms. So when I joined the army, I started with an associate's degree. We talked about that.
Right.
At the time, the Green to Gold program required a minimum number of credits, and I was already going to community college and trying to work on an engineering degree, bachelor's degree. But the requirements to become an officer were lowered because there was a drop in recruitment for officers. Okay, so when I commissioned, I knew that I had to get my bachelor's degree by a certain amount of time, and I mentioned that I spent 2 years, year and a half in training before I deployed, and then another year plus in country or deployed. I think cumulatively it was 2.5 years, but that was 2.5 years where there was no time to do online courses or like in-person courses or anything. I got back from Afghanistan, and within a year and a half, I got separation orders because I had not finished my bachelor's degree, and I was looked over for my captain's board twice. Once while in country, and a second time just before, I think 6 months before I got those separation orders. So I did not get out by my own choice. I could have finished my bachelor's degree and gone back, but there's a lot of stuff that transpired within the 2 or 3 years after I deployed. I tried to transfer all my credits and found out that through some educational laws or policies that were released in 2014, that all of my credits that were more than 7 years old had expired. I still have my degree. I guess not like that went away. It's just those credits are no longer transferable. So to pick up where I was, I would have had to start all over again. So I'd have to lose more or less that 2 years again to get my bachelor's degree. So like I tried going to the Navy, and like I technically still hold my commission. Like I never resigned it. I went to the Navy at one point and I was like, hey, I want to go EOD. And they had me take a pre-test, and they're like, oh yeah, you qualify, blah, blah. I was like, okay, well here's the sticking point. I told them, I was like, oh, crap. What it was is like, because I was already commissioned, they would not let me resign my commission to go enlisted, which is what I wanted to do, because to them it's like once an officer, always an officer. So it was a unique situation. Is like I was a highly decorated, effective platoon leader, and then was put out on a technicality, and then people who were absolute shitbags, like we talked about at the beginning, are still in the Army and still being shitbags.
Okay, just because I want to go into a different, but just because how big of a difference is leading a group of men in the Army?
Oh, it's hard.
Okay, but to compare and contrast Burns and Mac, you leading a group of like 4 people.
So
what would you say?
I think there's different perspectives on this. Is like going from an officer in the Army where people have to salute you, people have to like make way when you're like coming through a door. Like it is very much like prim and proper, like military courtesy is a thing. And it's almost outdated how ridiculous it can be. But when you're in that environment, in that culture for 5 years, 6 years, whatever it was, I was in that, coming out and going from like higher echelon in like the grand population of the Army to like a civilian sector. Like I was bottom of the totem pole at my job before Burns and Mac, and it was just kind of a culture shock because they didn't see my military experience as anything fruitful. They didn't see like my leadership potential as anything fruitful. Like it was just pumping out drawings constantly. So there was some situations at my first job that I just didn't agree with, and that's why I left there. I think we talked that I had taken a sabbatical more or less for about 3 months before I came to Burns and Mac. And I saw Burns and Mac as a new start, and I was really excited to be there at first, and I was really excited because there was all these resources available, and like I really enjoyed working with our team and most of T&D in general. But the problem was still upper management and through the chain, right? And it was a challenge going from, you know, military leadership to bottom middle of the pack, and then comparing that to like civilian sector, like business leadership. The principles are all the same, the difference is you can't shake somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, you know that there was some people that I wanted to shake on a
Yeah.
somewhat regular basis, whether it was inside of our team or with inside of a design team. It was like, how can you be this ignorant and, you know, just get off your butt? But, you know, you can't do that stuff. And that was one struggle that I had constantly, is like, I for the longest time was more expecting like immediate results, whereas like it was like a 3-week, 3-month, half a year sort of like turnaround on some of these things, and I think that was also frustrating. But that wasn't even like the icing on the cake as to why I decided to leave there. Like I said, it was just poor management.
All right. Well, we'll get back.
Upper management.
We'll get back to that. I'm curious, because as a man, because I can only imagine, because I'm also a man too, and pride kind of, let's be realistic, we all have some type of pride in us, right? And so leaving something where you're looked at so highly and respected, right? And then coming into the job before Burns and Mac, where it's almost like they just don't know. It's almost like, you don't know who I am, right? You don't know what I've been able to do and what I'm capable of doing. How does that affect Matt's way of viewing himself, right? Because I think, in my opinion, I want you to be realistic. I think that I'd be like, man, like, I know what I can do, and I've been treated with so much respect, and then these people are just, I feel like that would, personally for me, would affect me.
I had a conversation with Ashley very recently about this. Is like, I'm very proud of being a veteran. I'm very proud of what I did overseas. I'm very proud of the men and women that I served with in my platoon and within the company, the battalion, and everything. But like, I almost feel like a battered dog because of how the civilian sector has treated veterans in general, and like turned a blind eye to my own experience. Like I said, that first employer didn't want to recognize my military experience, like my leadership experience, and some of the skill sets that I developed being in the Army for the 10 years, or even in Afghanistan doing certain things like project management or report writing or whatever. Like they saw it as not applicable, which doesn't make any sense. So like, I would almost rather, this is the irony of it, is I would almost rather not talk about my military experience in certain settings. Not that it's a detriment, but it is of no benefit. Like, does that make any sense?
So my question, is it that it's no benefit, or do you think okay, I'm not even going to name any names, but I feel like some people would feel inferior. Is it inferior, or no, because you would feel inferior. Right, inferior is feeling less than, right? So people would feel inferior towards you, right? And so, again, as someone, because of this example, right? So you're going into a different work environment where someone is higher ranked, right? They're up top, whatever. And then someone who has military experience, because again, for me, I respect anyone that decided to do that, right?
So there were a couple instances. I think I know where you're going with this.
Okay.
But I have.
Thank you, because I was trying to word it, but.
I have a really bad analogy, but I think you'll understand it. Because because I was a veteran, with, I have several combat related citations. All right. There were several instances at Burns and McDonnell that upper management almost viewed me as like that token black friend, is like, oh, that's our token veteran because of my combat experience. And that bothered me, I think, more than like ignoring my skill set.
Right.
Is like taking it for granted. It was like, oh yeah, we have a veteran on staff and we have X, Y, and Z. It was like that's almost like reverse discrimination in some way, because they're keeping me around because of
what it makes them most,
like it does something. It boosts something somewhere. Yeah, that was frustrating.
Yeah, so again, I think it comes back, and then my other question, the question to that is, even though they're using you as this token thing, right, at the job environment, they still feel, because they have to feel inferior to you, right? Because not only do you have I had, because there's no way you
The one individual I think you're referring to, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I think they were very intimidated by me because, like, what you pointed out at first is like when we first met, I was probably quiet, I was probably reserved.
Mm-hmm.
I probably showed this level of like superiority because I was asking questions and trying to get information, but I am an observer first in almost every situation. I'm typically quiet for a good chunk of time, and then once I have established either my perspective or my comfort level, that's when I open up in a crowd or in a group of people. And I think the individual that we're talking about saw that as weakness at first, and then over time realized that it was actually a leadership tactic, or like it's a tactic in general. And they were certainly intimidated by it. But yeah,
No, see, and that's why it's not even so much that they overlook, because I think there's always we've hit a little bit of, like, over the last few years of this, like there's always an extreme, right? Some people are extreme one side and then extreme another side. And I think there's always a balance, and for some reason people can't ever figure out how to just get to that balance. But that's besides the point. Okay, so now again, this is probably the part where I know it might trigger some stuff, but I really appreciate you for being willing to talk about these, at least this point of view, because a lot of people don't want to. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. Okay, so the trauma that comes along with serving, right? I guess, what is that? We'll just start off as simple as possible. What does that look like for you?
So it's different for everybody.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Right. Some people, it shows very quickly. Other people, it sneaks up on you. Some people, it's just that quick break of living a certain lifestyle and then having it literally taken away. So I said before that we ran a pretty high mission tempo, 5 to 7 days a week, often 10 days or more at a time. And within my role and like the senior leadership role in general, I think we slept less because we were doing all the mission planning, all the debriefs, and just making sure everything was moving smoothly, right? So when I got back, I didn't know it was a problem for 6 or 8 months. It was interesting because in those 6 or 8 months, I thought I was indestructible and was doing a lot of reckless stuff, drinking way more than I probably should have been. But there was one time that I realized I had a problem because I had fallen asleep on the couch at my house in Pittsburgh, and my girlfriend at the time came over, and the back of the couch was towards the front door and the TV was back in the living room. And she came in and reached over the couch and like shook me to wake me up. I hurdled the couch and ran upstairs, came back down about 10 minutes later, and I was like, what just happened? She's like, you spazzed out and ran upstairs. I was like, I don't remember any of that. And then shortly around that time, I would wake up and I would be like staring into the closet or like low crawling around the bedroom or like doing weird stuff. I was having nightmares on a regular basis and like waking up in a cold sweat, or I wouldn't be sleeping because didn't want to go through whatever. I was actually at a coffee shop and they had the pin board with like one of those like little ticket flyers for like where we want to interview veterans that have sleep problems. Like it was very specific to some of the symptoms I was having. So I reached out to them and I ended up doing a number of, I think I worked with them for 1.5 years or more, learning different coping methods, like being able to adjust my sleep one way or another, like trying to truncate how much time I'm actually asleep, trying to get onto a constant regimen, talking about it on a regular basis. I actually did some in-lab studies on like sleep and sleep deprivation. I did a lot of like cognitive therapy around PTS because I don't think mine was necessarily experience. It was all derived by sleep deprivation because we were just going constantly. Right. But through all of those through that cognitive therapy, I was able to make some lifestyle adjustments and you know, found routines that worked for me. But if I am off a routine for 10 days, I know that I'm either going to have a headache or I'm going to have an episode.
Okay.
And fortunately, the headaches happen more often than the episodes, but the headaches are terrible. So there's that.
Oh, so that's why you always had headaches at work.
Yeah.
'Cause you were
My headaches started in Afghanistan.
Dang.
I was diagnosed with cluster migraines, cluster headaches, and DMOB, and tried a few different things. And being on a schedule, like being on a routine, was the most effective for me. But as soon as I go off that routine, that's when I need to have that stupid medication. And yeah.
So I don't know if I don't think I even overheard you. I think you were just having a conversation with someone about how you think that there should be more. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I completely misheard the conversation. But where there should be a space for veterans to be able to sit down and actually have these conversations. I'm assuming that there's some sorts of things like this already out, but I don't know what it was. I forgot what day it was. We were at work and you were on a call with someone. I think they were also a veteran or something.
Burns and Mac had a veterans. It was the Vets ERG. Vets was an acronym for something. Veterans Empowered to Serve or something, but it was an employee readiness group. So it was veterans and veteran allies within the entire organization. We had monthly meetings, both as the leadership team and just general attendees, right? So during the leadership meetings, we were often talking about like different things that we were trying to do within our office. And every month before the general meetings, I would send an email out to all the veterans in the Phoenix office, and never once got a response, never once got someone to attend the meeting. I talked to a few of our veteran team members within T&D, and they were like, oh, well, I don't know if I'll be able to make it. It's like, you just have to turn it on. Like, it's
right.
WebEx, just watch it. Yeah. And if something piques your interest, then let's talk about it afterwards. But they were constantly trying to do like coffee and donuts with a veteran, where they just have coffee and donuts brought in and you just sit there and hang out and share stories like this. That was another frustrating thing, is like I had all these grand ideas that Phoenix could do this, that, and the other, and whether it was a corporate policy or just general disinterest, nothing within Phoenix got off the ground. But I can't go without blame, because I was also 110% billable, going 100 miles an hour, 17 hours a day. So what you're talking about though was an initiative within inside of that group.
So where do you, in your perspective, because again, it was out just for you because you can't really you can't really speak about it from a different perspective, but what would you say that before you hit on it a little bit, but before you actually took the initiative to actually try to get the proper help, or I guess I'll say it this way, what do you think prevents people from actually seeking this help, right? Because at some point even though you don't recognize it right away, at some point
probably embarrassment. I think the biggest one's embarrassment.
Okay, like
you have a problem. I remember when we got back, we had, I think it was 30 days. I don't remember what our leave was. But the next time that my entire company got together, I was talking to a number of soldiers within my platoon, outside of my platoon, and one of the constant messages was they just felt uncomfortable, like sitting on a couch or like sleeping in a bed, because we slept on cots or like on the ground, or like there was one time we ran a mission for 5 days, and we slept in the cold in an open-sided tent out in the middle of nowhere, because we had to run this exercise, but nobody realized that it was going to drop in temperature as much as it did. So like it was not fun, right. But we were sleeping in some really crappy conditions, and one of the regular comments was that they just didn't feel comfortable around stuff. Like, I would go over to a friend's house and I'd just sit on the floor. Like, I didn't want to sit on a couch or a chair. I'd just sit on the floor. Yeah.
Because that's just what you were used to?
That's what I was used to. Like, living that for a year. I just sat on the floor. Like my possessions was a Foot Locker, like a Pelican box. That's where all my gear was, and a cot or a bunk bed. So like my desk was that box and my bed, or some combination thereof.
Okay, so then, but where does the embarrassment? I'm trying to understand where the embarrassment comes from.
So if you pulling the military part out of it,
right?
If you talk to the general population, men especially, it's something like 7 years to identify that they have a medical problem and should probably seek help. Like 7 years. And by that time, it's usually too far along, and it's going to be a lot harder to treat it, right? So like cancer or diabetes or something, right? Like it takes a while to self-identify, and they either don't want to make the time for it, or they're embarrassed of it, or whatever. But it is a systemic problem. The same is true with veterans. Is like we're supposed to, like, we've been trained to be aggressive and hardcore and whatever, and to admit that we have a problem, a personal problem, and to seek help for it is embarrassing because it's showing weakness. I think it's the contrary, personally, but
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so how would you go about? I wouldn't even say fixing the problem, because I think it takes a level of self-awareness to be able to make the decision to, one, say, hey, maybe I should go seek some help. As strong as I want to be, but what do you think could, in a sense, allow people to be able to, one, feel more comfortable? Is it one, because I know I hear there's not a lot of help for veterans. There's not like once they get out of the Army or military or whatever, there's not a lot of assistance for them. At least that's what I hear. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So there is, but there isn't. I think it's gotten a lot better in the last 20 years, because veterans are getting out and they're feeling empowered to create these like independent communities, or these independent programs or companies or whatever that focus on a certain thing. But you have to surround yourself with like-minded people. You have to be willing to talk about it. You have to be willing to do a little bit of legwork. There was an anecdote that Ashley shared with me this week. That one of her students reached out to her to say, like, hey, I was in this thing happened to me, and I was wondering if I could retake this exam. And Ashley was the first professor that this student talked to about this problem. And Ashley, because she went to that school and has used a lot of these programs, was like, well, have you talked to this department? Have you talked to this department? Have you talked to this? I think overall, the issue is not that there aren't programs, it's that the programs aren't publicized. They're not made public well. So like there's housing assistance out there, there's utility assistance, there's different therapy or medical or whatever assistance out there. It's finding those resources, and they're not well publicized in the military side, right, and in civilian side oftentimes. But yeah, you just have to do some legwork, and there's ways of finding those lists, and there's websites out there that you can do a Google search for, I need X veteran support, and it's there, but you just have to do some legwork. So
I guess then it comes back down to, at some point, getting that self-awareness and being willing to actually take some type of responsibility, right? And okay, so again, this might be a little sidetracked from the thing, but I think this is, you and I have had multiple conversations when it comes to this, right? Or not really this thing in particular. The taking responsibility aspect of it, right? And what does that one look like in you? Because I think Matt could easily, again, briefly, do you complain that, oh, hey, I didn't really leave the Army because of my doing or my choice, but you still take responsibility. Hey, this happened, but I'm not going to allow that to like really affect my work ethic, my ability to try to get things done. You still do your job very well. But I think a lot of people don't comprehend that, like, taking that responsibility.
But it doesn't, so this is how I see it, is it doesn't benefit anybody to point fingers. It doesn't. You're just going to piss people off. People aren't going to want to work with you. People are people are hypersensitive about things like that, right? So if you messed up, own it.
Right.
Learn from your mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So like there was a design that I did, I think right around the time that I was either going into Bullock or whatever. I had a lot going on at the time, professionally and personally, and I messed up this design. And it fortunately they caught it before it went to fabrication, but own your mistake. Like learn what happened. Learn that, oh, you know, I drew this 2-dimensionally. Maybe I need to draw it in 3D, or at least in like plan, profile, like every which way, to fully understand what's going on. But I think it's from that one experience that I also learned that I need to think in 3D and not just 2D, not just geometrically, but like environmentally. You know?
No, I get you.
So like there's opportunities in everything you do to learn, and some people are like, well, I know best. And you don't know best. Like there's 10 different ways to do a single task, and maybe this has benefit over that one, or that one has benefit over this, but everybody has a perspective. And if you're not willing to compare notes, you're not willing to learn and engage, then you're just a detriment to yourself and your team. I hope that answered your question.
No, it did. It just led to.
It was also
No,
a little
actually,
judgy, but
no, because like, see, most people would make that statement, right? But I appreciate it because like.
But I hope that you have observed that I live that.
That's literally because I was about to say, because even whenever when we're working together, and here's the interesting part, which always threw me off a little bit, only because I'm not accustomed to this, right? Most people in leadership want things to be done their way and their way only, right? So whenever we're doing any like the design work that we're doing, you're like, hey, Muzumini, first and foremost, before you come ask me a damn question, you first got to go and ask the internet, because the internet knows a lot of things.
What were the 3 stages? What did you have to do before you came to me?
Well, you had to go look it up online, try to figure out if you can figure it out on your own, and then
ask a team member, ask me,
ask you,
and then we'll ask the greater group.
Greater good. Yeah, and so, but that's so most people will be like, hey, no, because I know best how to do it. But even, and then also,
but now you're wasting everybody's time.
Oh yeah.
No, like I don't mean that negatively, but like if you have a problem and you ask somebody a question every time you run into any sort of interference, you are just wasting everybody's time, right? So like you didn't know, let's say you didn't know how to set up your camera today,
right?
And you had to like call somebody to come and set it up for you. And when all you had to do was like maybe read the instructions, right? You just saved probably 15 minutes of your own time and probably 10 minutes of your buddy's time trying to set up the camera that you had the answer right in front of you.
Right.
I'm not saying that's what happened.
Oh no, yeah.
But
you helped me. You're the one.
I did.
I called John. Like, well, since you're here anyway, let's do a podcast.
I turned the lights on. You know. I moved this chair. You know. I did a couple things. No, but like oftentimes the solution is in front of you. You just need to be able to use the resources. And a similar conversation has come up in the new job is like, how do you know to do this? It's like, I know how to research. Like that's something that I think I'm very good at is researching and documenting things. And I think it's weird that that's almost like a lost skill set. Is like, are people not required to write like a research paper or like to put together a presentation on something? And that's something that I was trying to instill into our team, doing the teachable Tuesdays, or like the 15-minute like tips.
Right.
It was like doing some research, taking your own thoughts, your own approach, and putting it into a documentation, and then working on your presentation skills too while you're at it. So like I use this with my kids all the time, is like there's the stated task and there's the implied task. It's like get up and ready for school. That's the stated task. But there's like 15 things that go into that that is inherent or an implied task, like putting on your shoes or brushing your teeth or going to the restroom or eating breakfast, right? What do you need to do to go from point A to point B and all the minutiae in between? That's the little stuff.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
But how do you get there? And I think that's something that people don't know how to step back and like look at all the steps in between and how they have influence on each one of those. That's where 10 different ways can compound.
Oh, can I ask you, with the follow-up, do you think that might be, because even though people don't really know how to research, I think they're just so used to the quick answer, right? Like it's an instant we live in my opinion, an instant satisfactory society right now, right? We want things to come at us. Netflix, you just have it there. Uber Eats, all these things. Just whenever I want it, I can get it, right? And so I don't think
I think it's those programs though that are unintentionally creating sheep.
Okay, yeah.
Is like the person that created that is now a millionaire,
Right.
and they had a little bit of creativity and a little bit of like outside the box thinking. They probably did some research on their own, but now they've simplified some process for the masses and are now millionaires.
So, okay,
But they themselves instituted the principle that I just described and took away that skill set from hundreds of thousands of people.
okay, I would agree with it, but then the issue is to me is like I think it's creative more so. It's supposed to be convenient, right? Like if you really can't, in my opinion, if you really can't do it, then you. But
that's built into that first tier that I gave you guys.
Right.
Is like if you have a question, Google it. That is the convenient part.
No, but the thing is like, and I think, but Google is also a problem, right? Only because there's so much answers there.
Yes.
But the thing is like, we want the first, like we want the answer to come up first. So there is no research that we.
There is.
No. I know there's plenty.
We're using your phone, but I'll say, where's your phone? I'll give you a topic, and the first one to find like the answer, and how many different things you have to go through, and I can show you my methodology. I do this every day, even where I'm at now.
Yeah, but I'm not. But the thing is like, you do it correctly, right? But
I wouldn't say I do it correctly. I do it my way.
You do it. Okay.
And I feel like I have a significant success rate.
You know, I think I would.
So I wouldn't say I do it correctly. I do it majority successfully.
Okay, so I guess then what's the difference between Matt and the people that have the exact same access as you? Because that's really where I'm trying to get at. It really is.
You need to boil down. What it is I think you need to boil down the keywords that you're searching for, and then you have to look at like the accuracy or the credibility of the source. So like we're talking about drafting software, right? So if you're doing a search for something inside of a specific software, list the software, list the type of function that you're trying to do, and then it'll usually come back with synonyms or accurate terminology within that confine, right? And then you should be looking at like Autodesk or Bentley specific forums, or on YouTube have it list out the software or the application inside that software, right? You don't want to be going to Wikipedia. You don't want to be going to like open platform discussions. You don't want to be going to all these like third party things, because it's either specific to that industry or that company, or it's unreliable. So you want to be looking for credible sources while going through the hierarchy of results. But usually those end up at the top because they've paid to be at the top.
Right.
So it's kind of a catch-22. If in my opinion, if you have to go past that first page or maybe the second page of results, there's no answer, or the answer is not credible.
Right.
But that's how I do it. I take into account the keywords that I'm using and the credibility of the search result, or the source of the search result.
Yeah. And I think you're really proving that, because the only issue that I see is that people aren't willing to try to understand that perspective, right? To understand that, hey, maybe the first thing that pops up is not the answer that you're probably looking for, and no one wants to. Again, that's where there's the instant satisfaction. They want to. The first thing they put in, if they don't get it, they're like, oh, it must not be there, you know? But
it's there.
No, yeah.
I was doing a personal search recently because I wanted to make this thing, and I put in some keywords, and it didn't come back the way I wanted it to. It had a solution, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted. So I took some of the results, and I was like, okay, I need to like refine my language, and I adjusted my language, and I found this video, and it showed what I wanted to do, but it didn't have like a voiceover. It just demonstrated this is how it's done. So I was like, oh, I can do that. So like I was able to like visually discern what I needed to do. I still need to figure out like all the resources, like physical and like mental resources to get there. But it might take 2 or 3 tries, 4 tries to find the exact keywords to hone in on the solution you're trying to find.
Right. Okay. This is not really the last question, but we're getting a little towards the end. My curiosity comes, what with Ashley, right? Ashley being your wife. How does your relationship? You talked a little bit about this before we actually got started because you wanted to be Matt and be great, but how does your post traumatic stress disorder affect your not even just Ashley, but just your relationship with people around you? But I would honestly like to talk about one because she's your wife. Talk about because you told me before that this all happened before you actually met her, but kind of progressively in your marriage, how has this not only affected both of you guys, but just your outside relationship? And then how do you use the tactics that you learned from the different outreaches that you went to be able to better navigate life with her? And how does that process look like for the both of you guys to navigate it, I guess?
I think we both have very good understanding of when one of us is in a funk or like in a bad headspace because of physical cues that we ourselves aren't able to pick up. Like Ashley can tell that I'm off for whatever reason, and it's I think we're both very sympathetic or empathetic to one another's struggles, because like I don't like crowds, and I credit that to being very close to an IED that went off in a church community. Not fun. I don't like being around like confined areas. I don't respond well to that, and she will oftentimes pick up on that, like at a grocery store, like at going to the convenience store to get silly stuff, right? Is I usually stick to the outside. I don't like going into the middle, and I am almost constantly moving. Like I don't like stopping and looking at stuff. I'll move out of the way, or I think I've caught her a couple times like putting stuff back, because I'll take it and look at it and like put it wherever, like boop, just yeah. Anyway, but we're both very conscious of why we act a certain way in certain environments. But at the same time, we also have very similar responses to things. Like we were talking before, is like we met because we went out to dinner for a work function. There was like 15 of us, whatever, and we were both like wrestling to be able to sit in a very small number of seats so we could see the entire room. We could see the door. Like it was a defense mechanism for both of us, and we were just kind of commiserating through that. But yeah, I think we have we're sympathetic to one another's behaviors, and in some way we also make fun of each other for it. And I think that's become therapeutic too, is like I'll do something outlandish. She's like, "Why are you being a dick?" And I was like, "Well, one, I didn't know I was being a dick." She's like, "Oh, you're being a dick." and it's like, well, why am I doing that? And the same thing for her is like, well, why are you hiding in the closet, like like metaphorically? Right. And so, well, I didn't know that I was doing this, and I was like, "Oh, you're being weird right now." So like in speaking openly about it, I think helps a lot too. Is, you know, being self-aware of what the other and yourself is doing, being able to communicate that, and then even making a game out of it or like making light of it helps a lot too. I hope that answered.
How do you guys both, with kids, I find that intriguing to have to navigate. How do you navigate that with Elizabeth and Abby? Abby being the oldest.
Elizabeth isn't old enough to understand or like to recognize that mom and dad are being weird. Abby doesn't know why we're being weird. She knows that I was in the service. She doesn't fully understand what I did. She doesn't know anything about Ashley's experience. Right. That's kind of a touchy subject with Ashley still. And Abby, before I came here, made a comment. I can't remember what Ashley did. It was like, "Mom's being weird," and I was like, "She is being weird." And Abby said something. I was like, "I don't know why she does that." I was like, "I'm not quite sure why either." And like we acknowledge it, but we don't like make it a thing. Okay. But I also don't want it to sound like this is a regular occurrence. Right. No. Like it's very fleeting that either of us are acting weird. It's just Abby, I think, is becoming more conscious of it, and sooner than later we're gonna have to have like a deep conversation with her about my experiences and Ashley's experience, and you know how the two of them interact.
Right. Wait, have you and Ashley ever went to therapy together?
Yes, once.
Was it not a good experience?
No, it was actually a really good experience. So for the first year or two that we were together, I knew that Ashley was in this situation. I knew it was a bad situation, but I didn't know much of the details, didn't know much of anything about it. And Ashley had been seeing a therapist for a while, talking through a lot of that stuff. And the therapist was like, well, how much does Matt know about this? And Ashley was like, well, just the basics, just like that it happened, and kind of the where what and who. So we went, and Ashley just like put it all out there, and the therapist was there more or less just kind of like narrate it, kind of to provide some clarity and some explanation as to why Ashley would respond to certain things, or you know, things to be aware of, whatever. Yeah, we've gone to therapy once together for her stuff. She has not been to therapy for my stuff, but she's seen like all of my medical papers. Like I still have all of my documentation and all that. So like she's seen it. She's seen a lot of the summaries and everything. But it's. I think that's the struggle though, is that hers is still ongoing because there are constant reminders in her life, whereas mine was very specific to the military life and, you know, just living a crazy lifestyle. So when my schedule gets completely out of whack, like it was at Burns and Mac, that's when mine comes to light, whereas hers could be set off by a noise or a sound in like a public place. It's really weird in that way. But
how do you continuously, because it sounds, this has to be a continuous growth thing, right? There's because here's I think one of the biggest challenges that I recognize is people think that you can fix something, like one day you fix something and that's it, right? How is Matt constantly trying to grow and better himself when it comes to this aspect? Not only to be able to have a fluid relationship and an open relationship to where things don't get so bad to where you guys both just are so angry at each other, but more so in your everyday relationship. How does Matt continuously challenge himself to be better in a sense in these perspectives?
That's an interesting question, and I said before is like that the first job coming back from Afghanistan, I felt like a battered dog because they didn't want to recognize my skill sets, and we're just kind of in a crappy spot, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought I had a better opportunity going over to Burns and Mac and, you know, kind of changing that dynamic and having more of an influence on projects and everything top to bottom, being in that position. But I do need to continually challenge myself, and the struggle is more that I'm focusing on myself and I'm not always focusing on what's around me, if that makes any sense.
No, it makes sense.
So like it's almost selfish because like I know that I need to get up, I need to work out, I need to do XYZ, I need to be in this headspace, I need to be here, but here may not always be the best for those around me. Mm-hmm. So I think that's actually the next step for me, is focusing on what's around me as much as what's like in my head, or like what is going on and has a direct influence on my mental or physical state.
Okay, so how would folk, and I'm only asking this because I think as a society we've made this, if I somehow focus only on myself and what I want and what I need and how can I benefit this, then somehow our life gets better. But I honestly think it's the next step that you're talking about. I think that's one, in my opinion, again, correct, I'll let you speak in a little bit. I think once you recognize that, man, shit ain't about you, right? Like, yes, your problems are real, and I'm not going to take that away from you, but how are others around you, one, benefiting from your presence, right? Because if I'm solely focused on myself, then how much do I really want to be with someone that's self-centered and it's always about them? Even though, again, you have every right to work on yourself, right? But I think the moment
Right, but I think it's the time and the place that you focus on yourself, that you do whatever you need to for yourself. Like, I think going back to our conversation about those certain individuals that our job together,
right,
they were only about themselves.
Yeah.
And as much as we tried to be for the entire team and for ourselves, like there's going to be a stopgap where you can't sway everybody to be a team player, and you can't be poisoned by those that want to be solely an individual. But how do you become the influence like you're describing, and a positive influence on those around you, while still working on yourself or working on something that you may be struggling with? I think that's a very rhetorical question, and something that we should all be considering, but maybe not publicly displaying.
Okay, I have a quick question. Do you not think that you can somehow work on yourself while...
Absolutely, that's what I just said.
No, while not focusing really on you, but more so on the other person? I think, because I've recognized, like, I think I've grown more whenever, like, even with the short time that you and I had the opportunity to work together, I think I grew more whenever I would be like, hey, I'm curious to know what Matt needs, right? I'm curious to know what is Matt going through, right? And in the midst of me asking you questions and trying to understand how, because I tried, I was like, how can I help Matt? I just didn't, I was not going to work for 15 hours a day. I'm so sorry. I love you, brother, but 15 hours a day was pushing it a little bit.
Obviously didn't want to grow.
But so, I think in the midst of me trying to not serve me, but try to serve you, I think I personally grew, right? Whether it's in my knowledge or just understanding you better and understanding what could I do in moments to help Matt, right? And so I feel like that self-growth in myself occurred even more whenever it wasn't really about me, but more so about how can I...
No, I think you're absolutely right. Absolutely.
Oh, all right. Well, there's not...
I don't really have anything to add to that. I don't know. I don't have an answer.
No.
Seth, edit that out.
I'm not gonna edit that out. That'll be the only thing I'm gonna post it tonight. Look, Matt had out of the 3 hours that we talked, he had absolutely nothing to share. No, I'm just playing. You have plenty to share.
Maybe it's I don't have an answer because I don't know how to implement it myself. Like how do you help yourself while like helping your children develop? How do you help yourself while helping your colleague with a project or a personal problem or whatever? How do you help yourself while helping those in your community? I think it actually goes back to the implied tasks versus the stated task, right? Is like the stated task is, I'm going to go hang out with Moose for 3 hours. And the implied task is like, holy shit, I have a lot of retrospect that I need to take part in. And I'm going to probably go back with a shit ton of questions myself and come up with a strategy moving forward. I maybe that's really what it is like the implied task is self-improvement, and the stated task is helping a friend or another veteran or your kids or your spouse or whomever.
Or working. Okay, so because the implied task. The implied task is just the mundane things that you're doing.
Not mundane.
Not mundane, but the tasks that you're doing to accomplish
it's everything to get to the end.
Okay, just because now I'm just thinking about it a little bit, because those tasks that you do, you don't really think about it very much, right? You're not like solely focused on, you're thinking about the end goal. So could it be possibly the same thing? It's not so much to think about how can I benefit myself while not really benefiting myself, right? It's more so just putting your full self in whatever it is that you do, or someone else, whatever. Maybe it's the not truly actually thinking about it. Hey, how is Matt benefiting from this, even though it's not really about him, but more so maybe a year or two down the road, be like, oh, man, that relationship that I had with Matt actually allowed me to. I wasn't thinking about it, but man, I've grown tremendously out of this perspective. Could it be just you just do what you got to do, and then.
But I think that speaking back to our team, I think there were people that were very receptive to personal growth and people that were like, nope, this is my way and that's how I'm going to do it. And I think you have to be receptive to outside influences, like having positive and even negative influences in your life, whether it's people or experiences or whatever, but you also have to be able to self-reflect and make improvements on yourself. And
Right.
if you're not willing to do one or the other, one or the other, or even both, then yeah, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Right. So then I guess it'll come back down to one of the first things that a while ago is like, you don't know everything, right? And I think that's why I respect I respect you, because the fact that you would even ask me a question, even though my mom like, this dude probably already knows the answer. In my opinion, again, just my thought, right? The fact that you're
I'm just
willing
trying to boost your ego.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, because that
Dude, you
didn't
have
it?
no idea. So I've been using Connect a lot.
Oh,
Since,
what?
Oh yeah, a lot since I moved over, right?
Uh,
And there have been a few times it's like, I really wish Moose was here. Like I was trying to do something this week. I've been using Descartes a lot too,
okay.
and I couldn't remember how, like something wasn't working, and I was like, I wish Moose was here because he'd be able to do this in like 2 seconds. And then I was like, oh, it's right here, and like I had to go into the properties and do something or whatever. But yeah, there's been a few instances where I wish you were on the other side of the wall.
Look at that. Jeez. I might have to. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this was another great Million Conversation with my brother Matt Schreier. If any of you guys want to pay him $1,000 a day to do any design work for you, hit me up first. I'm his manager, and we'll talk about it because I'm gonna need a cut. But other than that, it wraps up episode 7, I believe, of Million Conversation with Fallen Faith. So as always, God loves you. I love you. God bless, and stay safe. Thank y'all. Love y'all. Peace.